Guys, this corset, I need to go to a wedding. I don't have excursions planned for me to wear this right now. This is beautiful, guys, like beautiful. So maybe I'm a tad bit dramatic, but you have to admit, guys, this corset is really cute. So let's rewind. We're going back to the beginning. I'm going to show you how you can make this corset from scratch. And the first hurdle is to make the mock-up. Here's the mock-up 101. So you're going to need yourself or a dress form if you have one. I put a fitted top on underneath because I don't want to be taping on my bare body because that's just weird. But all you want to do is literally like tape half of your body and overlapping the tapes. And I'm literally just drawing out the shape that I want the corset to have. And then once I've done that, I can peel it off and this is what you should be left with. Now I'm taking my French curve and my pencil and I'm just going to be darkening those initial lines that we made. First I'm doing this for the outer lines of our corset, but I'm going to do it for the inner lines as well. Then we just want to cut along all of those lines to get our pattern pieces. What I will say is cutting through tape is not easy, so I definitely tried to take my time with this. Your girl was actually struggling. We're just going to skip past this and move to the next step. Next up, I'm taking my pattern pieces. I'm just laying it on brown paper. I've added about 1/2 inch seam allowance to all of them and I'm just going to cut them out. So these are now the pattern pieces that we're going to be working with. So we have 3 panels here. What I'm going to do is cut out 2 of each and that is going to give us our front piece. I said that so weirdly. That's going to give us our front piece and that's going to form the front of our corset. I'm just cutting out a mock-up here to see what it's actually going to look like. Also, mainly to make sure I'm not steering you guys wrong. I'm not, because this is the mock-up. I know it looks a bit wonky because I'm not holding it properly, but you get the vision. You get the vision, guys. So now we're going to move on to doing the actual corset. So I'm taking my pattern pieces, I'm laying it out on our fabric. I folded it in half. I just ended up using some leftover fabric from a skirt that I was working on. And I'm tracing around the 3 pieces. You just want to make sure that you fold your fabric in half and then cut it out that way. So that way you have a front piece and a back piece, if that makes sense, because we're cutting out 2 pieces for each panel. Hopefully the math is mathing as I say that. But yeah, once you mark it out, we're going to cut it out and then we should have our pattern pieces for the front. I'm laying the pattern pieces in order so we know what we're working with and then we're just going to pin them together. So I'm working with stretchy fabric. I'm using scuba, so I'm going to use my overcast stitch on my sewing machine to stitch these lines together. If you don't have an overcast stitch, you can use a zigzag stitch. Granted, if you use a serger, you use that serger. I would love to beat you one day. So the front is coming together nicely, but we still need our back panels. I don't remember the measurements on top of my head, so I'll put it on the screen, but we're cutting out 4 panels in total. So I'm adding 2 of each panels onto the front of the corset, and that is going to be the entirety of the front piece. So we're just clipping those extra pieces together and then we can stitch it on our sewing machine. So now we have the outer layer of our corset. We need to cut out the lining. So initially I would have wanted to use the exact same fabric that we used for the outer layer, but unfortunately I ran out of fabric and I kept checking and it was out of stock, so I ended up going for the white instead. So as you can see, I folded my fabric in half. That is a very weird angle of my face, but we folded our fabric in half and I'm just tracing around one side of the corset first, as you can see. Once we've traced out half of the corset shape, I'm going to fold my fabric in half and then I'm just going to use that to make sure that I'm cutting out like an identical piece, if that makes sense. And when I open it up, it looks more like the shape of the first piece that was cut out. I feel like the way that I said that sounded so much more complicated than it actually is. But yeah, that's what it looks like when you've cut it out. And I just need to add again like 2 panels, which is identical to the panels that we added onto the front piece. I'm putting the lining to the side for a sec. I'm going to work on this front piece. So I do want to add I do want to add boning to this corset. So I'm just going to stitch making a parallel parallel a parallel line next to each of these stitches. I'm using about 1/4 inch seam allowance, so as little amount of seam allowance as I can actually get away with. Bear in mind, if you are adding boning, you do want your channels to be big enough for the boning to actually go through, so it's worth measuring your boning before you get to this step. Now we've added the channel, I'm going to grab my lining again and I'm laying it on top of our front piece of our corset, so right sides are facing, and I'm just going to pin and stitch along the top now. I used 1/2 inch seam allowance, cut off the excess, and now we can move on to adding our boning. There wasn't really a set method to my madness here, I was just trying to see what worked. But essentially I'm using my boning and I'm pushing it inside of that little tube that we've made earlier. I'm just pushing it all the way up, and then I'm cutting maybe about 1/2 inch or 1 inch away from the edge of the fabric or the bottom of the corset, so that when we're stitching it, we're not stitching through the boning. I've just repeated that for all of the channels that we've made here, so that our corset has structure throughout. And then I'm just going to grab my fabric clips and then clip in the bottom now, because that's what we're going to stitch next. This is the point where our corset really starts coming together, so I'm turning it inside out, taking my time. You might have to like straighten out the boning just so it doesn't look all weird and bulky once you do flip it inside out. Now basically all we need to do is figure out how we're going to fasten our corset at the back. So to finish off the back, I just folded in both sides by about 1/2 inch and clipped that in place, and then I actually did a basting stitch along the edge just to hold it and make sure it was secure. I ended up adding buttons and loopholes for the back, so as you can see I took my sweet little time to cut out those tiny little ribbon strips and add it onto my corset. This took forever, guys, so I'm showing you like the high level detail of how I did this. But if you don't want to use buttons, you can granted use like hook and eye fasteners or anything else really to kind of fasten the back, even a zip. I ended up hand stitching all of the ribbons, all of the buttons, just because I didn't want it to shift and end up looking messy at the back. This was definitely a labour of love, but I think it was worth it. You guys saw in the beginning, but this is what this beauty came out looking like in the end. I'm in love with this corset. I'm giving this a 10 out of 10, but let me know what you think. If you are trying to make a corset but with things that you already own, make sure you check out this video here.